Hey there, it's Simon Hurley from Inklips and welcome to another video. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. Now today I'm going to be sharing some quick tips for Copic coloring on your cards or using any other alcohol markers to get some really quick and easy stamped and colored results on your cards in case if you're making a lot or if you struggle with coloring. I'll go through a couple of tips that will hopefully help you out. Now before I get into the rest of the video, I wanted to share a quick tip on stamping a full set of images really quickly so you can head out the door and start coloring them all. Now for this video, I'm going to be using the FLOPSY bird stamp set from Ink Blot Shop. I just love all these adorable little birds and you'll see me use them throughout the video, and I love their little style that they're drawn in here. So I'm going to take that whole stamp set backed with the acetate backer sheet there, and I'm going to grab some masking tape and line it up on my MISTI lid there. And then I'm going to tape the top and the bottom of the stamp set to secure it into place on the lid, and this makes it so that all of the stamps can be stamped at once and they're all intact together, and it didn't take much time to have to peel them all off at once and stick them down. This makes it so you can put lots of ink on the whole stamp set, stamp it down onto one sheet of a big cardstock here, and then give it lots of pressure and evenly stamp it down. Now after I've done this, even if you've messed up or missed a couple areas, you can always go back in and stamp it down again. So in case if you messed up, you don't have to waste anything. And once I pull this out the second time, I have that whole sheet of stamps with all those different images that I can then color in with Copic markers and have lots of fun. And all you need to do is take a couple sets that you've stamped out on the go or on vacation, and you can have lots of images to color in. So to start off the cards that I'm creating today, I decided that I only wanted to use a couple of the birds on these cards, that I didn't need the whole set. So I'm just going to peel a couple of those birds off, line them up in the MISTI, and then I'm going to stamp them down. Now I'm starting off with some Nuvo embossing ink here. I'm going to go over all the stamps and make sure they have a nice coating of that. And then I'll also go over top of it with a black ink as well. This makes it so that I have that black ink on top, so it'll stamp nice and crisp, but you also have that embossing ink, which makes it really nice and sticky. So this allows me to come in with some clear embossing powder here, and I'll just sprinkle some embossing powder over top of all these images. Now I know you can just Copic color with some regular black ink, but I tend to struggle with that, and sometimes I'm in the middle of a project and a line smudges when it's not supposed to. So having this little extra barrier of safety with that clear heat embossing can really help. And I'm also going to be using the Ink Blot Shop Arts and Crafts Sentiments. Now I just love these, they're really funny and they go really nicely along well with any crafty cards and can go on the outside of envelopes as well. But in today's video I'm going to use them in kind of a weird and creative way, and you'll see in just a second here. So I'm going to take all these little icons of little cards and scissors and paints and stuff, and I'll line these up in my MISTI here as well. Now you don't have to use the MISTI for this, I just find it easy and I tend to do lots of my stamping in here since I tend to mess things up. But I'm going to cover it with that same embossing ink and then the black ink right over top, and I'll stamp this down here as well. And then I threw some clear embossing powder over top and heated that. Now I know white heat embossing can be kind of damaging for your Copic markers, but the clear seemed to work just fine, but I would avoid using white or other colors because it kind of messes with your markers. So now it's time for the Copic coloring fun here. So I brought in my Copic markers and I'm just going to start coloring in these images pretty quickly. You'll notice that I go pretty messy here, and the reason being is because when I color in so many images, I don't really want to add a ton of detail to each one and do lots of detailed coloring. So here you'll notice that I'm just going right outside of the lines. I'm kind of scribbling over all the images and laying down a general overlay of color. Now this just makes it so that I can go outside the lines, not have to worry about bleeding or anything, and do this super quickly. And later on I'll be cutting these out so it doesn't matter in the long run. Now adding on that little extra layer of embossing powder was an extra step, but in the long run here, as I'm coloring outside the lines and going over those lines with my markers, you'll notice that none of them are bleeding and they stay super crisp in the end. Sometimes I find that some inks fade or will kind of give a little bit of a halo line, even when they're not supposed to, if I didn't wait long enough or anything like that. Now with that embossed line, they stay really super crisp and I can do all my coloring and not have to worry about it, which is really nice. Now with each little bird here, I tend to go in with the lighter color first, then I go in with a medium and do any shadows. Now I don't get too technical with this, I kind of just throw shadow and color in wherever I think necessary, so where the body parts meet together, or if there's little lines on the stamps, I tend to add some shadows in there. And then I add some really dark shadows with the last marker and then blend it all out with the lightest color. And that tends to work out really well with the blending for me. And you'll see that I do that with all of these birds here. Now just kind of laying over that general overlay of color though can be very helpful at the beginning, just to kind of saturate the paper and get it ready for the darker colors. So I tend to start out with the lightest one and go light, medium, dark, and then back to light to blend it all out. Now with these little icons here, I kept this part pretty simple. I find that colorless blender really helpful. I just lay down 1 or 2 colors of gray if it's a white image, and then I'll blend it out with the colorless blender so that it still looks white. And since I did the heat embossing on these little images and they have lots of detail, they still will stay super crisp, like that little spool of twine or that little glue bottle stays super crisp when you just color one stroke over top of it. And I'm going outside of the lines here as well, so you'll see I just colored right over top of that crayon and let it go way outside the lines there. And if you do really want to save time, you don't have to go in with different shades, especially on these smaller images. You can just keep it with one simple flat overlay of color, and I think that looks good as well. Now moving on to fussy cutting all these images out, I'm just going to go right alongside of the edge of these birds to make it look like we stayed in all the lines here. Even though we colored outside, it gives it a nice finished look again. And I'm using these Fiskars Spring Assisted Scissors, so after you push down and make a stroke with cutting, they spring right back out so it doesn't tire your hands as much, and I find they worked really well ever since I started card making. Now you want to move the paper as you're fussy cutting, and I also find that gives you a nice clean edge, so if you're struggling with that, be sure to move the paper instead of the scissors, and that works really nice. Now you'll notice that I'm cutting off the little bird's feet here, since they're little tiny stubs, little lines there. Now these birds aren't gonna scream, trust me, but later on I'll share how to add those little feet back on, and you didn't have to cut them out, so that saves a lot of time. Now for all these little icons here, I'm cutting them right alongside of the edge as well as the birds, but if you wanted to, if you did stay in the lines, you could always leave a little white border, but I find this gives more of a little crisp look here, as I'll be adding these images together and creating a nice scene with them. So now I'm going to share how I put all of these cards together after coloring in all those images here. So let's start off with this little flamingo card that says consider yourself carded. Let me just tell you, I love these sentiments and images and those little art icons. I feel like these go perfectly together. So I'm stamping that down, that little flamingo, onto just a piece of white cardstock there. And then I'll cut a little slit into the wings, following that little line there that the wing creates. I'm just going to cut that a little bit, and this will create some room to slide in a little envelope or card or one of those little crafty icons. I thought this little card was perfect to tuck underneath that little flamingo's wings. And then I'll add some foam tape and stick it right down to that stamped image, so this gives that little bird his feet back. Now to make the background a little more interesting, I'm going to do some partial cutting. So I put it on an angle in my trimmer here. I'm a little off screen, but I just cut out a little bit of the portion around the flamingo there. So there's 2 little lines that I cut in there. And then I'll go around and take my scissors and just cut right along the flamingo, leaving a little bit of a white border around it. And that created that little line, and the flamingo kind of pops out of it there. So then I added the little card with an envelope tucked underneath, kind of right behind the little flamingo. And I love this little sentiment to go along with it that says, consider yourself carded. I just think all these images went perfectly together. And then I'm going to put this on a background of a blue card base here from Gina K. And I'm going to take an ink pad that's a little bit darker, and I'll just go over the top of that lightly there. And that creates kind of an interesting background. It gives it kind of a chalky look with that little ink there and a little bit of texture and color. So moving on to the next card, I did something very similar there, except I just kept it kind of on a flat panel and pretty darn simple with 2 of those little birds. So this time I ended up cutting both of the sides of the bird's wing here. So since it has 2 sides, I just cut right along it, making sure the little black line of the wing was still on the outside so that it looks like he's holding that little pair of scissors there. So I tucked that underneath there with some adhesive and moved it around until it looked really nice underneath that little bird's arm, and it looks like he's heading off to a little crop there. And I cut this little bird's wing as well and stuck a little glue bottle under there. So these 2 crafty friends are heading off. Now for the background here, I just took an ink pad again with this really awesome colored cardstock from Gina K again. And I'm going to rub that darker color of ink there. Now it looks really dark right now, but it ends up smoothing out, and I really just love that texture behind this, and it just gives it just enough texture to finish off the card. And then I stamped that little sentiment that says, "For your crafty friend," and mounted it with some foam tape. Now for this card, I changed it up a little bit here. I'm going to do the sentiment that says, "I like big crafts," and I cannot lie, which I just found hilarious, and I stamped that next to this little bird here. So he looks pretty innocent, and I'm going to color in this little craft sentiment with a rainbow assortment of Copic markers to make it stand out just a little bit more, because we all know crafters love their rainbows, so I colored that in like that. And then I stamped that little bird and just stuffed his supplies with art supplies there. So I stuffed a little Copic in there, as well as the little twine, and I add that on with some foam tape as well. And I think that finishes off that little tiny panel really nicely there. So for the backgrounds on this card, I decided to use the Inkblot Shop Arts and Crafts Icon stamp set. So it has lots of scissors and cards and lots of different art supplies in a bigger format here. So I decided this would be great for a background behind these little birds. So I lined up all these images and took them out of the packaging there in my MISTI. So this makes it so that I can create this background over and over if I wanted to. After I lined up all those larger images, I filled in some of the littler areas with some scribbles or those little splatters, as well as like little pieces of washi tape and things like that. So then I picked my MISTI lid up with all these images here, and I was ready to stamp the backgrounds on my cards. So for this first background here on this card, I used a dark brown ink here with a craft note card. So this is going to make my background here. So I'm doing it right on the card base. And then I can stamp this down really nicely and give it lots of pressure. And if I wanted to, since it's in the MISTI, if I had a magnet down, I could stamp this over again if I made a mistake. But I really love all those fun little crafting images in the background, and I think it completes this card really nicely. Now for this next card, I finished it off with a good one, I think. This one's pretty funny. So I added one of those little birds on top, flying above with a little crayon in his hand, and then I'm going to stamp down the sentiment, which I also thought was hilarious, that says, "I arted." And then we're going to make the bird's art below. So I took two of those splatter images and stamped them down in a green and an orange color, and there's the bird's art below him. So then I added a little bit of shimmer on top of the bird's art, because let's face it, in the card making world, bird's art has to be sparkly and shiny. So to quickly add that, I just used the Nuvo Shimmer Aqua Flows there, and that just adds a clear coating of shimmer, and I made his little crayon shimmery as well. Now for the background, I did a green card base from Gina, and then I stamped down all these images with a little bit of a darker green ink, so you again get that same tone-on-tone background, and then I added the bird panel right onto the card there, and I think any crafty friend would love that. So there's all my cards today. They're a little bit funnier. I loved making them, and I also loved the quick Copic coloring on top of these fun images. So if you guys want to see more of my videos, I have some on screen here. Be sure to click on over my blog on screen right now. I'll have a full supplies list over there to all these fun stamps as well as supplies, as well as much more information. And be sure to click that subscribe button as well to never miss another fun video like this one. I'll see you guys very soon. Bye!